armed soldiers standing shoulder to shoulder with shields interlocked.
Look at that. So this was a new form of warfare that we've seen. And the Greeks would later adopt this very similar type of strategy, including the hoplite army.
Yeah, so warfare also took on a different character during the Age of Colonization. Henceforth, all Greek battles were fought by heavily armored foot soldiers called hoplites, arranged in a tightly packed formation called the phalanx. In the phalanx formation, soldiers lined up almost shoulder to shoulder, with each rank almost treading on the heels of the one in front of it. The hoplite army, their equipment consisted of a helmet, upper body armor, breastplates, shin and knee protectors. Greaves were redesigned to be thicker and stronger, so bronze replaced other metals. The phalanx formation was normally 8 rows deep, and the hoplite's main weapon was his very long spear. The most innovative item of the equipment was a new type of shield called the hoplon.
I'm just going to write down some terms here as we go through, as we learn new things. I'm just going to write down the key terms. Maybe some new terms that you haven't heard of before. See the very long spear, a very thick shield, a hoplite soldier. Yep.
The equipment itself weighed about 70 pounds, almost half. Wait, is that sentence cut off?
Sorry, it got cut off. That's okay.
Okay. It was unbearably hot inside of the armor. Vision was also restricted by the dust and helmet, and the noise within battle was deafening.
Here's a good look, and that's Roman soldier there. Yeah, we could see the Romans also adopted something very similar.
Okay, the formation. Hoplites would line up in files no less than 4 deep in very close order and lock their shields together. The first few ranks of soldiers would project their spears out over the first rank of shields and created a mass spear and shield wall.
It'd be very hard to breach that, right? Very hard to get past this type of formation.
The problem with that is it's hard to turn.
Yes, it is. You're right. You're very static. You're very still, right? And one dimensional. Yes, and you're right. That is one of the disadvantages for having a strategy like this.
Didn't the Romans completely exploit that?
Well, the Romans did. The Romans were, again, they used something very similar, but they used a system, and I'll go through it later, that was more agile. Their ability to go from one position to another, they were much quicker than the Greeks. So they kind of took this formation and advanced it as well. Okay, last slide.
Warfare in the Age of Alexander, a phalanx, a formation of infantry carrying overlapping shields and long spears, developed by Philip II and used by Alexander the Great.
Good, yeah. Okay. So we're not here yet. This is roughly 300 BC, so we're not here with Philip II and Alexander yet, but yeah. Okay, so this is just a brief look at what the Greek soldier looked like. Okay. And the phalanx, their position. So today we're going to look at some wars, some battles. Okay, so the Greek battles that we're going to be focusing on today, and there are 3 main ones. Okay, let me go down here, and that is the Battle of Marathon is the first one. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with this, but there's the Battle of Marathon. There's the Battle of Thermopylae right here. You watch the movie 300. And then there's the third and final battle, Salamis and Plataea. There we go. Okay, so these are the three battles of the Greeks versus the Persians. Okay, the Greco-Persian Wars, 490, 480, and a year later, 479. These are the main battles that I want to focus on. Now, before we do that, I kind of need to give you a good understanding of why it happened. So we're going to focus on the battles itself, okay? But I want to give you some background information. So if you remember the old Babylonians, sorry, the new Babylonians, the Chaldeans, they fell in roughly 530 to 539 to the Persians. That's when Mesopotamia ended for us, right? Now, that's 539. Roughly 30 years later, they're going to come into battle with the Greeks. So I want to explain to you how that happened, okay? So we're going to watch this video, which is called The Beginning of the Greco-Persian War. This is very important because you need this background information, okay? I also have this right here for notes. I'll post it here. So you could see the Persian Empire built by Cyrus the Great, 559. He's going to talk about an Ionian revolt. This is important. An Ionian revolt against the Persian, which the Athenians helped by sending assistance, okay, which the Ionians were revolting against the Persians. This is really what's going to lead us into this first major battle of Marathon. So this rift between Athens and Persia over past alliances and cities. Two important people here, Herodotus and Thucydides. These are the two historians that are going to provide the information from these accounts. So these two are very important, Herodotus and Thucydides. This is a background information here. Should copy that too. Let's watch. Let's see why this all started.
This right here is a map of the Persian. This right here is a map of the Persian Empire in 490 BCE, before the Common Era. And you see that it's an extensive empire. It was established by Cyrus the Great and then his successors. We talked about it in previous videos, how they were able to conquer the Neo-Babylonian Empire in 539 BCE and then go on to conquer much of the Middle East, able to conquer the long-lived Egyptian Empire. And they seem somewhat unstoppable at this point in 490 BCE. At this point, we have Darius is ruler of the Persian Empire, the Achaemenid Empire, as it's often referred to. And they're able to keep expanding until they come across some unexpectedly resistant people, and that's the Greeks. And this is probably one of the most famous and legendary stories in history, the rivalry, the conflicts between the Persians and the Greeks. And you should maybe take it with a little bit of grain of salt, because what we know of it, the history that I'm about to give you, comes to us from Herodotus. And Herodotus, who's often known as the father of history, he was Greek. And he also lived after a lot of these conflicts happened, and he wrote about these conflicts. His adult life was well after these happened, so he had to talk to people who were around that time. And obviously, he is getting the Greek side of the story. There are no surviving Persian accounts for it, so you might want to take it with a grain of salt, because the accounts of Herodotus do tend to make the Greeks look pretty good. But let's just talk about what happened, because taking it with a grain of salt, it is a fascinating series of stories. So you have Darius as king. You can see the extent of the Persian Empire in 490 BC, or really at the turn of the century, if we were to go back 10 years to 500 BCE. but they are in control of some folks who are a little bit more rebellious than most of the people that are within the Persian Empire. And they are in this region right over here, known as Ionia, where you had Greek settlements that are now under Persian control. And from 500 BCE to about 494 BCE, so kind of the first 10 years of the fifth century BCE, you have a series of revolts in Ionia. Let me zoom in on that a little bit so we can see that. You can see our timeline right over here. So this area, we're now zoomed in. This area is referred to as Ionia. This would be the coast of modern day Turkey. We are out here on the Anatolian Peninsula. And these rebellions in 498 BCE, the rebels are able to take over and burn down Sardis, which is under Persian control. The Persians under Darius are not happy about this. So they send a force to take back control and also to get a little bit of revenge. Because when the rebels were able to take over Sardis, they had help from some of their Greek brethren. And it's important to note that the Greeks weren't some type of a unified state. They weren't a unified empire like the Persians were. They were a fragmented group of city-states. You have the famous Athens, Corinth, Sparta. All of these city-states, they shared a common language. They shared similar religion, but they were not one unified empire. But when their brethren, the Greek rebels, these Ionic rebels, I guess you could say, rose up against their Persian rulers, they had assistance from Athenians and from folks in Eritrea. And so when Darius finds out about this, not only does he want to take back what the rebels had, he wants to suppress them. He wants to put down that rebellion. He also wants to have revenge on the Athenians and the Eritreans. And so the first thing he does is he sends out a fleet in 492 BCE. So you see his fleet here in green, this fleet that I am tracing. He sends it out in order to seek revenge on the Athenians and the Eritreans, but he is unlucky. And once again, these are the accounts of Herodotus. His fleet, his large fleet, runs into a storm and is mostly destroyed. And so in 492 BCE, the Persians are unsuccessful. But they're not satisfied. Darius is not happy with that idea that we are the largest empire known. We should be able to take on these fragmented Greeks with a much smaller population, much less wealth than the mighty Persians do. So in 490 BCE, he sends out another attempt to take over, to seek revenge and to subjugate the Eritreans and the Athenians. And this time he is a little bit more successful. His fleet is not destroyed. So this is this brown color. I'll try to color it in. This brown color right over here, you can see the path of the fleet this time. And he is able to subjugate and take over Eritrea. But as he's going to Athens, which you can see right here, they decide to stop at Marathon. They decide that word might be familiar to you, and we'll talk about it in a second why it is. And that is where they're engaged by the Athenians. And the Athenians are able to defeat the Persians. And this is a very big deal in history. And once again, this is Herodotus' account. But up to that point, the Persians seemed invincible. But now the Athenians were able to actually destroy them in a battle. And the Persian fleet, they go back to their boats. They run back to their boats, according to Herodotus, and many of them are killed as they retreat. And they're going to go back around the peninsula, potentially to go attack Athens, but they decide not to, and they retreat. Now, the word and so this is a very big deal in history, first of all, is that this mighty empire is put back in this battle. It oftentimes, historians will mark it as the beginning of kind of Greek ascendancy, the ascendancy of Greek civilization at the end of these Greco-Persian wars, and we're really just in the beginning periods of right now. That's really the beginning of the Greek Golden Age. But as we'll see, the Greco-Persian wars are not over with the battle at Marathon. That was just the first, I guess, major interaction over the next few decades. Now, one thing that you might be saying is, hey, that word marathon, that seems familiar. Maybe some of you have run a marathon, or you want to run a marathon, going 26.2 miles. You might say, is there any relation to this battle, to this location in Greece called Marathon? And the simple answer is yes. So there's an apocryphal story. When people say apocryphal, they're like, well, we're not sure if it really happened or maybe didn't happen. And this one, people are pretty sure it didn't happen. The story goes something like, when they had the battle, a messenger was sent from Marathon to Athens, and the distance from Marathon to Athens is roughly the distance of a modern marathon, around 25 or 26 miles. And the apocryphal story goes, they went to deliver the message of the Persian attack and the success of the Athenians. And then when the messenger gave that message, he just passed out and died. And so when the modern Olympics that we've set up now over the last 100 and something years, they said, hey, let's have an event that celebrates that run from Marathon to Athens. And that's where our modern marathon actually comes from. Now, the actual story, as best as I can figure out, and I encourage you to look up primary documents to figure this out for yourself, is it's mixing up a few stories. After the victory at Marathon, the Athenian army did quickly mobilize and go back to Athens and cover that distance in order to defend Athens. Because remember, it looks like the Persian fleet were coming around this peninsula right over here to get to Athens. The story of that runner is there was a runner named Philippides who was sent from Athens to Sparta to convey a message. That's actually a much further distance. In a lot of ways, it's much more impressive. But those two stories were mixed up together into the story of Marathon, which is where we get our modern day distance of the marathon. Hey, let's all run roughly the distance from Marathon to Athens. In the next video, we'll see that the Persians are not done. Darius will not be able to seek the revenge that he wants in his lifetime, but his son Xerxes is going to keep going at it.
Okay. I hope that helps, guys. Okay. I hope that helps. Gives you a little bit of a background there, right? So again, just to go through it before we start reading our battles, you have the Persian Empire built by Cyrus, right? Ionian revolt, which was later helped by the Athenians, okay, which they sent assistance. Okay, this does not sit well with the Persians, okay, so they retaliate, and that's where we get the Battle of Marathon, 490. Persian King Darius I fleets, about 20,000 soldiers. Okay, Athenian general Miltiades convinces Athens citizen army to attack Persians at Marathon. And for the first one, the Athenians are victorious and they gain confidence. Okay. So let's read about it. Let's read about it here at the Persian reading. You see there's a chart, which later you're going to have to fill out. So let's pay close attention. Let's read about Marathon first on this first page. Let me choose a reader today. KD, do you want to read?
Sir, pardon? You want me to read?
Would you like to read?
The marathon? Wait, no.
Yes.
Oh, okay, the marathon. Okay, so in 490 BCE, the Persians advanced across the Aegean as far as the plains of Marathon, about 40 kilometers northeast of Athens. The new Persian king, Darius, was determined to punish the Athenians for their role in the Ionian revolt and to expand his burgeoning Empire. The Battle of Marathon was one of the most famous in the Persian Wars. Miltiades,
Mhm.
the Athenian general, decided to march his army out to Marathon and set up camp at the southern end. He hoped to delay the battle until Sparta could send reinforcements. Miltiades dispatched a professional runner,
Philippides.
Phidippides, in Sparta to seek help. Phidippides ran the distance of 250 kilometers in 2 days, then ran back to the marathon with the Spartans. Response. He told the Athenians that the Spartans were to help, but for religious reasons, could not come until after the next full moon. According to legend, Phidippides collapsed and died after gasping out his message. His amazing feat made marathon running a popular sporting event. The Persians heavily outnumbered the Athenians at Marathon, and the Greeks had neither cavalry nor archers. Nevertheless, the Athenians chose to attack. It was
Was it risky?
oh no, sorry, it's just okay. Yeah. It was a risky decision because the defeat would leave Athens unprotected. Their plan was to take advantage of one of the Persians' key strategies. Since the Persians placed their best troops in the center of their formation, the Athenians would counter by strengthening the wings of their force. The battle was long. As expected, the Persians broke through the weakened Athenian center, but the Greeks defeated them out on the wings. The Athenian troops then closed in on the Persian soldiers in the center, trapping those who had broken through and driving them back to their ships. The Persians who escaped sailed south, hoping to find Athens unprotected. But the Athenians army rushed back to the city from Marathon and reached it by evening, in time to force the Persians to abandon their plan and sail back to Asia. Today, visitors can still see the funeral mound for the 192 Athenians dead on the battleground in Marathon. Thousands of Persian soldiers perished in the battle. The Athenians saw their victory as a glorious event. A stone in the central marketplace of Athens reads, "The value of these men will shine as a light imperishable forever."
Thank you. Thank you so much, KD. Great job. Okay.
No problem.
So, so there you have it. Okay, so for the first battle, okay, victory goes to the Greeks. Okay, victory goes to the Greeks for the first battle. Okay, so we'll put here winners. Winner, the Athenians. Okay. So Battle of Marathon, 490. Winner, the Athenians are victorious. And wow, for the first time, the Persians are subjected to a major defeat. Wow, no one expected that at this time. Okay, so the Athenians and the Greeks are feeling much more confident. Okay, and roughly 10 years later, we have our next battle. 10 years passes. The Persians have not forgotten about what happened at Marathon, and they want revenge at Thermopylae in Greece. Okay, that's our next read. That's our next read, our next battle with King Xerxes and Leonidas. Who would like to read this one? Who would like to read battle number 2? Who wants it? Dina. All right, Dina, it's all yours. Are you ready? This was a very, very popular battle, right?
Thermopylae. Realizing that the Persians would probably return, the Athenians under Themistocles took defensive precautions. Most importantly, they developed a strong navy with a fleet of 200 ships. In 481 BC, all Greek states that were prepared to resist the Persians held a congress at the Isthmus of Corinth. Sparta and Athens decided to share the leadership role, although many states either turned down the invitation or indicated that they did not intend to fight the Persians. The Congress was still significant. It represented the first attempt the Greek states ever made to form a national league. The concern of the Athenian leaders was well founded. Xerxes, the son and successor of Darius, was determined to continue the assault against the Greek mainland. In May of 480 BC, Xerxes set out from Sardis. His army, estimated at more than 180,000, was so large that the troops took weeks to cross the Hellespont. His fleet, supplied and manned mainly by subject peoples, consisted of over 1,200 ships.
Wow.
The Greeks chose a defensive position at Thermopylae, a narrow pass through which the Persians had to pass. The Greek had about 7,000 troops, mainly Peloponnesians, commanded by the Spartan king Leonidas, who had brought with him 300 of the finest Spartan soldiers. The Greeks hoped to hold the Persians at Thermopylae while attacking the Persian fleet north of the island of Euboea. After 3 days, however, the exhausted Greek fleet turned south and things began to go wrong on the mainland. A Greek trader led the Persian forces along a mountain path to the far end of the pass at Thermopylae. Seeing that his forces were being trapped, Leonidas ordered most of the army to leave. He and his Spartan contingent held the pass as long as possible, fighting valiantly, but all were killed. Not one Greek soldier survived the battle.
Wow.
There were like 300, like 7,300 people against 180,000 soldiers.
It was tough. Yes, it was a very, very difficult battle for the Greeks. And as you see here, yeah, very interesting, right?
Did they know how many soldiers that the Persians had?
They didn't know it was that much. They knew it was a lot, but I have some updated notes here for the battle, right? Persian King Xerxes leads invasion of Greece, revenging defeat at Marathon, temporary land bridge built to cross the strait. Okay, again, Greeks formed their coalition of 31 states, led by the Spartans, King Leonidas of Sparta, with 300 of his best troops, okay, and 7,000 troops. Okay, the 200,000 Persians, numbers more here. Greek shepherd, who was a trader, so a Greek trader, a shepherd, told Xerxes of a route around a mountain. Ooh. Persians attack on both sides and tracked the Greeks. Persians capture and burned Athens. Athenians evacuated by sea to Salamis Island and will attack Persian fleet there. Okay, so battle number 2, Thermopylae. Winner are the Persians.
Sir, all of these informations are from like that person's recount.
Yeah, Herodotus and Thucydides. Yes. So this is sorry, Dina. Sorry.
No, I was just gonna ask, like, are those the only like things you have available of those battles? Like,
I mean, unfortunately, it was so long ago. We just don't have a lot of information. But what we do have, again, comes from these Greek historians, right? Yes, Mr. Nathan.
Yeah, wait, isn't Thermopylae the one place where like the phalanx was just overly effective?
That the what? The
phalanx.
Oh, what did you say?
Wasn't that the only place where it would just like be a perfect?
It was perfect, yes, because it was such a narrow pass, right?
Yeah.
It was very short. You couldn't really attack from the wings. You just had to go center. And that is, yeah, that definitely benefits the phalanx formation. So this is such an important battle that I have a video here that I'm going to show. It's about 20 minutes. Now, it's a bit old, but I really like it. It kind of gives you a really good explanation of what happened at this battle. Okay, and they use different type of technology here, so it's a bit outdated, but I really like it. Okay, I actually think it's a lot better than the newer ones. So let's watch this. It's about 20 minutes. Okay, it's all about this battle.
In August 480 BC, this is Thermopylae, on the coast of mainland Greece. I'm Matthew Settle. In August 480 BC, a Greek army of only 7,000 men, led by King Leonidas and 300 Spartans, fought here against a 250,000 strong invasion force, led by Xerxes, the king of Persia. At stake, the future of Greek civilization. Now, with new video game technology, you are about to see this great battle as never before. The vast numbers of soldiers, the troop formation, how they fought, and how the battle was won. Get the view the generals wished they had. Now, decisive battles. 2,500 years ago, Greece was not a unified nation. It was a collection of independent city-states like Athens, Corinth, and Sparta, each with their own laws and systems of government. The Greeks lived under the shadow of the mighty Persian Empire, which stretched from present-day countries like Turkey, through northern Egypt, Israel, Iran and Iraq, to Afghanistan and northern India. 2/3 of the known world. But even this was not enough for the Persian king Xerxes. He wanted to expand into Europe. Greece was the gateway. 10 years earlier, his father Darius had been defeated by the Greeks at Marathon. Xerxes was determined not to suffer the same fate. He gathered a huge army from all corners of his empire. 250,000 men set out for Greece.
Xerxes' expeditionary force to try to conquer mainland Greece was the mother of all expeditionary forces. Nothing like this had really been attempted before in the history of ancient warfare.
In 480 BC, Xerxes crossed the Hellespont and moved his army down through northern Greece, while the Persian fleet sailed along the coast. City after city fell.
Xerxes was a pretty fierce sort of guy. He wouldn't stop at anything to achieve his aims.
But Xerxes' goal was Athens. The Greeks had to stop him at all costs, and they had to do it here at Thermopylae. Otherwise, he would have a clear run to Athens.
Given the configuration of the Greek peninsula, that is where an army of any size has to come down. Thermopylae was the obvious place.
The Greek name Thermopylae means hot gates. The place was famous for its hot springs. With high rugged mountains on both sides, the narrow pass was easily defensible. But it was also the gateway to Greece. But 2,000 years of sea and wind have eroded the battle site away. This is what it looked like in 480 BC. The Greeks sent an army of 7,000 men to hold the pass. They were joined by 300 soldiers from the city of Sparta. It is impossible to imagine a city more unlike Athens than Sparta.
Spartan society was at the opposite pole from Athenian society. Athenians were very open. The society was wide open to anyone who wanted to come there, and they would share everything with us, whereas the Spartans was a very closed society.
Spartans were educated to be soldiers, nothing else. From the age of 7, all Spartan boys trained for war. The army was their life. Even when married, the Spartan men had to live in barracks. They couldn't take up any other trade. They couldn't deal in business or commerce. All ordinary work was done by slaves.
Sparta was a small town. It had no more than 9,000 peers, full Spartan citizens at any one time. So this army, everybody knew everybody else. If you were standing in formation, your brother might be over there, a couple of ranks behind. Your father might be over here. Your cousins would be over there.
They provided the leadership, they provided the spearhead, they provided the backbone. In every respect, their presence was what made Thermopylae what it was.
The 300 Spartans that marched to Thermopylae were led by Leonidas, the king of Sparta. He wasn't optimistic about his chances against Xerxes. For one thing, he had set out during a Spartan religious festival. This was thought to bring bad luck. Also, the Greeks had received bad news from the oracle here at Delphi. The priestess predicted that a Spartan king would have to die before victory was won. Leonidas' wife, Gorgo, asked him what she should do if he didn't return from battle. To which he replied, "Marry a good man, have children."
He was apparently of absolute determined resolution and personally brave. He would have been in his 50s, not a young man, coming up towards retiring age, even in ancient Greek terms.
The Spartans wore a sculpted bronze breastplate and a helmet designed to terrify the enemy. Each man carried a shield shaped like a shallow wooden bowl. Painted on the face of the shield was the Greek letter lambda, for Lac Diamond, the Spartan homeland. The main weapon was a thrusting spear, wielded over-arm. 8 foot long with an ash shaft, a leaf-shaped iron head, and a bronze butt spike. In close combat, they drew the short sword, the xiphos. By contrast, King Xerxes' Persian army was lightly armed. These men were trained for fast-moving warfare on open plain. Xerxes relied heavily on the Medes, who were deadly archers. The pride of place went to his elite band, 10,000 immortals.
The immortals were the cream of the Persian army. They were recruited as an elite. The term immortal was the Greek one, which they used because they believed that every time one of the 10,000 was killed, instantly in reserve, there was another guy waiting just to step into his place.
Leonidas stood with his Spartans at the narrowest point in the pass. 7,000 Greek troops deployed behind them. They defended a low wall. Xerxes drew up his army on the flat floor of the entrance to the pass.
Xerxes waited 4 days once they got into position there because he couldn't believe that these Greeks were going to actually stand and fight. He thought it was a joke.
On the 5th day, his patience ran out. He demanded, "Surrender your weapons." Leonidas shouted back, "Come and get them."
A lone scout rider got sent by the Persians up to where the Spartans were waiting before the battle. And some of the Spartans were out there doing their gymnastics. They were oiled up and they were combing their hair. And the rider just looked, it just blew his mind. He said, what were these guys doing? How could they be so blasé? And of course, what they really were doing was psyching themselves up to fight to the death.
Xerxes had a throne set up on a nearby hill. From several hundred feet above, he ordered his Medes into action. From their vantage point, the Greeks could only see a few thousand. This was merely the advance party, for a force of 10,000 Medes, which wound round behind the mountain. Leonidas held back his Spartans and ordered the Greek troops forward. Battle of Thermopylae had begun. It would not be the walkover that Xerxes imagined. August 480 BC, the Greek army led by King Leonidas and 300 Spartans is facing a Persian army of 250,000 men. The Persian king Xerxes watched in disbelief as 700 Greek troops formed up at the valley entrance. They lined up in a phalanx formation. The phalanx was a forest of spears.
The commander would signal for the push, rear ranks pushing forward and pressing their shields against the backs of the men in front, and you pushed against the forces opposing you and literally tried to shove them backwards and drive them off the field. They trained their whole lives for this moment.
This phalanx was 18 men deep and 64 across. Their shields overlapped like the scales of a serpent's back, virtually impenetrable. The first three ranks lowered their spears and rolled forward towards the Medes. In contrast to the Greeks, the Medes were lightly armed. They carried light wickerwork shields and spears. Before they advanced, the Mede archers fired a volley into the phalanx. Leonidas sent in more Greeks to reinforce the phalanx, pressing their weight into the backs of their fellow troops. Volley after volley of arrows filled the sky.
The Greek infantry had a 3-foot shield. The shields were bronze-faced with maybe 2 inches of oak underneath that. So if you want to think of that as a kitchen cutting board. And how hard you can whack a cutting board with a battle axe if you break it.
As the Greeks began to tire, Leonidas sent in his Spartan warriors. They advanced in a phalanx formation as the exhausted Greeks ran back.
As they would advance, they would be talking to each other, and inspiring each other, encouraging each other to advance while these other people are advancing towards you. I mean, as each step got closer and closer, the terror must have been unbelievable.
The highly trained Spartans slaughtered all in front of them. The Medes saw that their own weapons were useless, and in desperation began grabbing at the Spartan spears. And now the Spartans drew the Xiphos, and the real butchery began.
Are you hungry? Are you tired? Are you thirsty? Are you wounded? It doesn't matter. You're a warrior and you fight.
The confined space made it impossible for the Persians to take advantage of their superior numbers. They could not pack enough men into battle against this unrelenting killing machine.
Combat in those days was all hand to hand. Nobody shot anybody. No smart bombs came in. If you were going to kill the enemy, he was going to be right in your face and trying to kill you.
Wave after wave, Xerxes' warriors perished as they tried to penetrate the Spartan shield wall. Leonidas joked, "Xerxes has plenty of men, but no soldiers." But the Spartans took casualties as well. Spartans had a method for identifying their dead, many of whom were battered beyond recognition. They would take a twig, put their mark at either end. They'd break it in half. Half was kept in a bowl behind the lines, and the other was worn around the wrist. So there you have the ancient equivalent of a dog tag. If the soldier survived, he could reclaim his twig after the battle. If not, the dead and lost could be easily counted. As the battle moved into the second day, the Persians could make no headway. They were simply not prepared for this kind of fighting. Far removed from the wide open plains of the east where cavalry, chariots, and light infantry could decide the outcome. Sitting on his hillside throne, Xerxes became more and more agitated, jumping to his feet every so often like a spectator at a football game.
Xerxes just said, hey, you guys go out there and take that pass, kick these guys out of the way. And these lightly armed Medes went up against the heavily armed Greeks, and the heavily armed Greeks kicked their butt.
Xerxes decided to play his trump card and send in the immortals. There might have been hundreds of thousands of soldiers on the battlefield, but now the combat was between two fighting elites. 10,000 Persian immortals against what remained of 300 Spartans. August 480 BC. The Spartans had held the pass at Thermopylae for nearly a day and a half. Xerxes had failed to crack their defense. Now he gambled everything by sending in his own personal guard, the immortals. They were a magnificent sight. They carried bows, spears, and short daggers. But rank after rank of the elite shock troops fell in the dust.
The light-armed Persians couldn't penetrate the Greek armor, but the Greeks could penetrate them at will. And also the Greeks were trained to fight at close quarters and to come to grips at close quarters.
Nothing could shake the Spartans. Xerxes needed a miracle, and it came from an unexpected source. A Greek trader, Ephialtes, seeing a chance to get rich quick, crossed over to the Persian camp. He told Xerxes about a pathway that wound around the mountainside and came out behind the Spartans.
The name Ephialtes has entered the modern Greek language. It means nightmare in modern Greek. Ephialtes is today a nightmare.
Under cover of darkness, the Persians filed up the track, and on the morning of day 3, emerged behind the Spartans. Leonidas had been outflanked. He knew this would be his last battle. To avoid unnecessary casualties, he sent the rest of the Greek army home. The Spartans would stand alone.
It must have been an amazingly emotional moment as men were walking out, brave men, knowing they were going to live, while others were walking up to the front line knowing that they were going to die.
One of the Greeks had warned, the Persians have so many archers that their arrows will blot out the sun. Well said the Spartan Dionysus, we will fight in the shade.
This was Spartan wit. And when somebody says something like that, you laugh and fear goes away.
Leonidas was more somber. He ordered his men to breakfast, saying, "Tonight, we shall dine in Hades." As the battle recommenced, the Persians closed in from both sides on the tiny band of Spartan survivors. But the Spartans, with nothing to lose, fought like demons. The Persians suffered heavy losses. Then Leonidas fell. His Spartan soldiers rushed forward to save his body from capture and mutilation.
The fact that the Greeks fought in the way they did to preserve his body from the Persians at the moment of final defeat again symbolizes how important the position, the status, the role of the king, the leader, actually was.
Xerxes now decided to bring this battle to a quick end. He had tried to fight soldier to soldier, the honorable tradition of his Persian ancestors, but he could not break the Spartans. He had lost nearly 10,000 men, including 2 of his own brothers. He decided to withdraw his troops. He would finish the Spartans off at a safe distance with arrows. The Spartans regarded the bow as a weapon for cowards because it killed from a distance. Thousands of arrows rained down on the broken Spartans until not one was left standing. They were finished off by the weapons they despised most. A furious Xerxes ordered his men to find the body of Leonidas, and once they'd found it, to cut off his head, stick it on a pole. The Spartan king had made him pay a terrible price for victory at Thermopylae. 10,000 casualties was a drop in the bucket from such a vast force. But it was a blow to Xerxes and the morale of his army. He was astonished that men would fight for an ideal, the ideal of freedom. Xerxes raced on through Thermopylae to capture Athens, but its citizens and army had already fled. Later that same year, 480 BC, they took to ships and defeated the Persians in a great sea battle at Salamis. Xerxes' grand scheme was in ruins.
Had the Spartans not done their bit at Thermopylae, then I think the whole war effort, the whole Greek resistance, would have started to crumble.
For the Greeks, it was destiny. A Spartan king had died, a Persian king had been defeated, just as the oracle had prophesied.
All kinds of great civilizations that vanished, that left incredible monuments, but the Spartans left nothing. But what they left, just by their actions that one day, is more indelible and is still living today.
The people of Greece, the courage and heroism of Thermopylae had sent a message of hope and pride. The 300 Spartans would never be forgotten. A grateful Greece paid the poet Simonides to compose their epitaph. Go tell the Spartans, stranger passing by, that here obedient to their laws, we lie.
Okay. I hope you guys enjoyed that. I think that was a really good video. I'm just going to show you that battle in terms of film. So Thermopylae was the only one that we're going to watch. Okay, so that's going to be it for me teaching today. So if you take a look at my screen, you could see what I'm going to leave here for you. I have a PowerPoint here that kind of goes through everything we've learned today, which will help you for your homework. So you could use my PowerPoint. Here is the chart that I'm going to go through. There's a chart here, and if you scroll down, there's the readings for each one, just a very short reading. Okay, I have lines here because you can, if you want to print and take notes, you can do that too. Okay, you can read and take notes on the battles. And then I have my 2 videos and the textbook here, and the Persian War 4 questions. Okay, so if we take a look at your homework, so what you're going to do for me for the rest of class and for the weekend, I've posted here the Greek homework, Persian Wars. Pretty straightforward. Read the Persian War package and textbook, these pages on the 3 battles. Complete the chart in a Google document. That's this one. And answer the 4 questions here. And this you could do everything on this document since it's already a Google Doc. Okay. And of course, I'm still waiting for a lot of the homework from yesterday, which was due. It's due today, which is Greek colonization. Okay, still waiting for